The almost eve of Thanksgiving. I am Lisa Gubernick, the VP of Membership for NCJW, and my co-host is Susan Katzman, the immediate past president of NCJW. We began Coffee Talk as a way to engage our members and non-members during a time when we could not be together in person. The show was so well received, we are continuing to bring you Coffee Talk. And in the spirit of Thanksgiving, let me just say that I'm thankful for NCJW and all the ways this organization touches so many lives. And for Susan agreeing to keep doing Coffee Talk, even though I know there's a lot going on. We have a very special guest with us today, Marcia Mermelstein, or the Pie Lady, as she is known in the community. Pie in the Sky business owner Marcia Mermelstein has enjoyed making and sharing pies since she was in high school. She learned the skill from her mother. Marcia worked as a middle school English and social studies teacher in Wisconsin and Tennessee, and then got her master's in social work from Washington University after moving to St. Louis. She has worked at a variety of non-for-profit agencies in the St. Louis area, where she has used her creativity and skills as an educator and social worker to provide both programming and counseling services for children, families, and adults of all ages. She makes a great NCJW member. Her first pie sales were to the original Caldi's on Broome. Her pies have been sold at a variety of other local cafes, at Parker's Table, at the Women's Exchange, at the Ladue Market, and at both the U City and Clayton Farmers Market. And there's a baby picture of Marcia. Marcia has added catering to her repertoire, providing wedding pies and other baked goods at weddings, baby showers, birthday parties, and other celebratory and holiday, there's another picture, holiday events. She also enjoys hosting pie parties where each participant learns how to make his or her own beautiful apple pie from scratch. Marcia has shared her love of pie with her three beautiful daughters, all of them are excellent bakers and cooks. She still has a dream of opening her own pie shop. Marcia is going to demonstrate how to make an apple pie, including how to make a crust. And I can personally attest that I have never made a pie, but after watching her video, I feel confident that I could. So she'll walk us step by step through the video, and then stick around because she'll answer questions live after it. And you can put any of your questions in the chat as the video is playing. And also be sure to stay around, because at the end, we are going to raffle off one of Marcia's apple pies that we will hopefully be delivering to you, as well as one of the amazing gadgets that she's going to show on the video. It cores the apple, it peels it, and slices it. And I definitely want one. So we're going to start off with her video, and then again, put any questions you have in the chat, and we will have Marcia answer them live after. Thank you, Brooke.
So I'm very lucky today. I've been asked by NCJW to talk about pie, and talking about pie and baking pies and sharing pies is something that I love to do, and I've been doing for a long time. My mother was a pie baker, and that's how I learned to make pie. She did not grow up knowing how to make pie, but she married a man who loved pie, particularly chocolate cream pie. And when she got married, she kept trying to learn how to make pie crust, and as many people find, she found it very challenging. I have a lot of friends who are very good bakers and very comfortable in the kitchen, and they're very intimidated by pie dough, and they say, I can't make a pie. So what this is all about today is to let everybody know that you can make a pie. Everybody can make a pie. You just have to have the right recipe. And my mother struggled and struggled, and she used in those days something called spry shortening. Eventually, I think they maybe discontinued it, and what we usually had in our house was Crisco shortening. But she finally found there used to be little recipe booklets on the outside of cans of shortening, and she found a recipe, and it wasn't so much the recipe as the technique that finally enabled her to learn how to make a good pie dough. And she taught it to me. I learned how to make pie dough just like I learned how to make brownies and cookies and cakes and whatever, and I didn't think anything about it until I got into college. And the first time I invited friends over for a dinner at my house, I made chicken cacciatore out of probably, this old Betty Crocker cookbook, and I made a cherry pie. out of a recipe from Betty Crocker using my mother's recipe for pie dough. And these people thought that I was a kitchen genius. You made a pie. I have learned as an adult that if you bring a pie out for dessert, you get applause. And if it's warm, you get a standing ovation. You know, you made this pie. So she learned how to make pie using this recipe. And it is, for me, a no-fail kind of recipe. So I'm going to teach you some tricks, and I'm going to also give you all kinds of disclaimers that some of the things that I'm going to do break rules that you're going to read in other cookbooks. But before I even get to that, whenever I do a pie lesson or a pie party, which I do at people's houses sometimes, if they like to gather some friends in their kitchen, if they give me their kitchen, I bring everything and everybody walks out with their own beautiful apple pie. I always like to start with a favorite quote about pies. So today what I'll start with is, I've learned you really have to stop your life to make a pie. That is what makes it the ultimate gift. It is a gift of yourself, a gift of time. And so that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to teach you how to make pie so that you can give a gift of your own time. Okay, so when you're making a pie, as I mentioned, it's not so much the recipe itself that is the issue. Every pie recipe that you're going to find in any cookbook is going to have flour of some kind, even if it's a gluten-free pie crust, which is a whole other topic that maybe we'll get into with questions and answers. You're going to have flour, you're going to have salt, you're going to have fat of some kind, and you're going to have liquid of some kind, almost always water. Some pie crusts tell you to use vodka, some tell you to use apple cider vinegar, and those two things are recommended, and it's just a little bit of it, and that's because it says that if you use those things, it somehow helps the crust puff up because it evaporates faster than water. I just use water, and I don't use lard. Real-time, old-time bakers who grew up in farms in rural areas will tell you there's no pie crust better than one with lard. Don't use lard. I like to use Crisco shortening because I really do believe that shortening makes the flakiest pie crust. But there are plenty of people that don't like to eat things made with shortening, or they feel that butter has a better flavor, and they're right. Butter absolutely has a much more delicious flavor. So when I'm making lots and lots of pies for customers at Thanksgiving, I almost always use just shortening. But when I have time, my favorite combination is half butter and half shortening. So the first thing I will show you today is something that I learned from my mother, and I also learned in foods class in 7th grade at Old Mission Junior High in Shawnee Mission, Kansas, that apparently is not taught anymore. And that is something called the water displacement method. Lots of people think that if you need a cup of shortening, what you would do is take a cup and stick it in here and just kind of, measure it and smooth it out. I was taught that the much more accurate method of measuring a solid like this is to give yourself, well, I'm going to measure a cup today. What my recipe calls for is 2 cups of fat. So I'm going to use 1 cup of shortening and 1 cup of butter, which is 2 sticks of butter. So because I want 1 cup of shortening at the end, I have put 3 cups of water into this measuring cup. It is a 4-cup measuring cup. So I'm going to put my shortening into the water, and I'm going to push it down, and if I'm real lucky, it will actually stick at the bottom. If I'm not, I may have to press it lightly with the spoon. That's what you want it to do. You want it to stick. And what you want to do is put enough shortening in here to raise the water level to 4 cups, which I think I might just about be at. Actually, I'm a little bit over, so I'm going to take an ooch out. You want to raise that water level to 4 cups. You started with 3 cups of water. I have put in a bunch of solid. I've raised it to 4, and what that means is that I have a cup of shortening in there. So the water has nothing to do with anything. It's just part of the measurement. So I'm going to get rid of the water, and now I know I have a cup of shortening. So I'm going to put the shortening in my bowl. I'm going to, Lisa, I think I have a grater over there, like a cheese grater. It's silver. I had it. There we go. one of the rules that I tend to break when I make pies, you read recipes and they always tell you everything has to be cold, 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 cold. Lots of people keep their Crisco in the refrigerator. If you're using butter, it's supposed to be ice cold. You're supposed to use ice cold water. I don't do that. When I'm using butter, I'm okay with keeping it cold until the end. What I'm not okay with is blending rock hard butter into flour. That's one of those steps where people who don't like to make pie crust run into trouble. So one little trick that I've learned and that helps a lot is if you take your hard butter and you grate it, it obviously warms it up some, but not enough to, really make any kind of difference. And it gets very shreddy, which makes it easier to blend into your flour mixture. Now, a question that somebody may eventually ask me, which I'll go ahead and answer, is can you make pie dough in a food processor? And the answer is absolutely yes. I happen to prefer working it with my hands just because I can feel if it's right, but you absolutely can do this in a food processor, and you would do exactly what I'm doing, although you wouldn't have to grate it. If you do it in a food processor, you put your butter and or your shortening in chunks. If you're going to use your butter, you would put it in 2 or 3 chunks. You put it in your food processor and add your dry ingredients. Pulse it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, whatever it takes to get to the crumbly mixture that you're going to see in a few minutes. And then get your water in and it combines, and it's very easy. So I have my fat in my bowl. Before I do any more measuring, I do want to show you that if you don't want to use the water displacement method and you don't want to mess with shortening, you can buy this magic thing that is 1 cup of shortening that's already been measured out for you. You can buy it in a package like this, 3 sticks. I always try to keep this around so that if I am in a real hurry and I don't want to mess with too many utensils, you have a cup of shortening right here. Very easy. Very expensive compared to a can of shortening, but makes it easier. So now I'm going to measure flour. I'm going to measure 2 2/3 cups of flour, and you guys are all going to get this recipe. This actually is a recipe and I guess I should not be getting ahead of myself. I always kind of shuffle through the flour. I don't sift it, and I don't weigh it. Real bakers, real cooks will weigh things. I don't worry about it. I just dig in and make sure that it's even. So I've got 2 2/3. This is a recipe that is really technically going to give you 2 dough balls for a 10-inch pie. Now, most standard pie pans are 9-inch pie pans. So there is a different recipe where everything is a little bit less. But I like when I teach people to give them the 10-inch recipe, because one of the things people are fearful about is rolling it out big enough, and it just gives people extra dough, and it also gives you some dough at the end to either cut out little cookie cutter things that you can use to decorate the top of the crust with, or you can, sorry, I'm stepping out of the frame, but in my house growing up and in my house with my kids, there was no leftover pie dough, because once you make your pie, if you've got scraps of pie dough, you can roll it out. What I did here is to roll out my scraps into a flat piece of pie dough, and I brushed it with a lot of melted butter, sprinkled it with a lot of cinnamon sugar, rolled it up, cut it into little spirals, and then put those on a cookie sheet, and again brushed them with more butter and more cinnamon sugar, and then I cut some others in just little circles and brushed them with some whipping cream on the top, just a little bit, and then sprinkled sugar and cinnamon on one, and the other I made some like mint sugar. And so you have little pie cookies or pie pinwheels, and so there's never any worry about having leftover dough, but this recipe will give you leftover dough. We have our Crisco and butter, and we have our flour, and so the next ingredient that I'm going to add is salt. For a long time, I used just Morton's table salt, and as I began to read more food blogs and watch more food baking shows and just do more reading. I did read from a lot of people, including my guru, Ina Garten, that kosher salt really is better to use when you're baking. It's less salty, and there actually is a best kosher salt. I think it's Diamond brand, which I've not been able to find in town, but that's what the real professional bakers use because it's the least salty. This is sort of next, and table salt is next, so you can just be aware of that. But you do want some salt in your mixture. And now some people add a tablespoon or so of sugar at this point. As I said before, I don't feel like your pie crust needs to be sweet. You're going to put a wonderful sweet filling in there, and so for me, the pie crust is all about the texture, not so much the taste. So I've got my salt and my flour here, and the next thing we're going to do is mix the fat in with the dry ingredients. The next step is combining this, and there are various ways of combining this. My mother always did this with a fork. She would take the side of a fork and work it in. There are some cookbooks or some cooks that will say take two butter knives, and just kind of cross them and cross them and cross them. The idea is that you're trying to combine all of this dry flour with that glob of fat that you have, of whatever kind of fat, so that you end up with crumbles. I learned a lot. So when I started making pies, I always did it like my mom did with a fork. I learned somewhere along the line that there actually is a tool that was created exactly for this purpose, and it's called, not surprisingly, a pastry blender. This is designed to blend your fat in with your dry ingredients to create your pastry. So you can use this little nifty tool, and you can scoop it. You don't want to press it. You don't want to mush it down because you're not making dough yet. You're making crumbles. So you brush it up from the bottom, and you just gently start to press down. So now you've seen the pastry blender, but I'm going to tell you that I recommend two other tools, and that are these. I had learned that handling pie dough, you wanted to do as little as possible. So when I hung out with another woman that I met who is a serious pie baker in Iowa, and she had been trained as a pastry chef in California when she worked there, and she started crumbling like I am right now with her hands, and I was just stunned. And I said, doesn't that make the pastry tough? And she said, no, you don't want to handle it after you've added the water. You don't want to knead it, and you don't want to handle it a lot after you've added the water. But right now, just crumbling this in, this is, she said, and I agree 100%, this is the easiest, fastest way. It may not be the neatest, but you can wash your hands, but you don't have, a pastry blender to have to stick in the dishwasher. And what you can feel is when you run into these big pieces of butter or Crisco, because you don't want those. You want to keep crumbling and crumbling and crumbling until it gets to be, the recipes will tell you the size of peas. And that's kind of just whatever you can do to make it as even as possible, but don't get obsessive about it if you have a few large crumbles. And I think this is probably just about at the point where I'm going to say it's ready. So now we're at a critical step when it comes to making pie dough, and this is a step where a lot of people have trouble, because this is where the recipe says to add the liquid, usually just water, into your pie dough. A lot of recipes tell you at this point to take your water and by the spoonful to sprinkle it over the top of your crumbles and to blend it in. And that's where you run into trouble, because you have not a small amount of dry stuff, and you have, basically, I've learned that a Dixie cup is my perfect measure. It turns out that a Dixie cup is like a generous half cup. Recipes will tell you 8 to 10 tablespoons or 7 to 8 tablespoons. For me, it's a Dixie cup, but it's a generous half cup of water. So it's not a lot of water to be blended in here. What happens is that if you put it in like all at one time, or if you sprinkle it like they tell you with a tablespoon at a time, it doesn't work very well. and it doesn't blend. And then it's not coming together, and people add more water so that it comes together. Then it gets sticky, and then they throw in more flour so that they can work it. And then it gets too hard, and then they throw in more water. You've thrown off the whole recipe and the whole chemistry of it, because that's what baking really is about. And that's where people just sort of end up literally throwing their hands up and saying, I can't do this, it's not ever gonna be dough. Here's where my mother's technique becomes magic. Instead of putting the water into the dry ingredients, you put the dry ingredients into the water, and you make what is known often as a sort of a slurry. I mean, that's not what her recipe said, but that's what this is. And there's no, you can see I'm not measuring. You just put it in a spoonful at a time until you get a mixture that is still liquid, but is pourable. And you kind of want it to be like oatmeal, is what I tell people, but you want it to be pourable. And then you just kind of make a hollow in the middle of your crumbs, and you pour your liquid into the middle. So there's no change in the amount of water here. It's just the way we're combining it. Okay, so we have poured the liquid stuff into the middle, and now I'm just gonna combine it. And what you've given yourself is this large wet middle to absorb all of that dry stuff. And I'm using the back of the spoon, and I'm just mushing it together. That is the technical term. And this dough feels a little mushy, a little too wet to me, so I'm going to throw in a little more flour just because it doesn't feel. And sometimes, like today, it's going to come together just with the spoon. There are times when you're making your dough, and a lot depends on the humidity, and a lot depends on the temperature in the house. But sometimes you've pressed with your spoon and you've mixed it together and it's just not completely coming together. That's when you can put your hands in, and that's when you can use this glob of wet dough kind of like a piece of masking tape to pick up the rest of the dry stuff that's at the bottom. And you don't have to be obsessive. You don't have to get every crumble. You just want to try to get as much as you possibly can. So what I have here is a large dough ball. You can take a knife and cut it. You can use a food scale and you can weigh it, but you don't really need to do that. I just sort of tear it in two, try to get two equal sized balls of dough. And here's where I kind of part ways with most of the recipes, because now what they will tell you to do is put this in saran wrap or in a baggie, and or wrap it in aluminum foil and put it in the refrigerator and let it get good and hard. And my objection to that is that if you're not secure about rolling out pie dough in the first place, and you take out a solid cold lump of dough and you try to roll it, it is extremely challenging. This is, I wish you could feel it when I do these pie parties. I always make sure I pass the dough around so everybody can feel it. It's like Play-Doh. It shouldn't be sticky, and it shouldn't be dry, and it should be very easy to roll. So what I do is I roll out my dough, I make my pie, and then to concede to this idea of trying to have it chilled when it goes in the oven, I put it in the refrigerator and I let the whole made pie refrigerate for a little while, and it sort of sets up then. And the idea of this coldness is that they want the ingredients to be as cold as possible, again, so that the pieces of butter that are in here or the Crisco that's in here, that when the cold ingredients hit the hot oven, that they kind of melt quickly, and that's what creates those pockets that make the wonderful flakiness in pie dough that we love. So I kind of skip the step of refrigerating the pie dough at the beginning. I make the pie and then I refrigerate the pie for 20 minutes or half an hour to chill it, and then I bake it. Okay, first critical step was how do you get all the little amount of liquid combined with your dry. We've done that. Next critical step is rolling it out. And there are people who have Tupperware plastic pie rolling mats There are people that use wax paper. There are people that swear by marble cutting boards. I swear by, again, something that was created exactly for this purpose. This is called a pastry cloth. I've bought various pastry cloths at various places, and like I said, I really want to make sure that they can be washed. And some of them, when you throw them in the washing machine, they shrink terribly. Some of them, not only do they shrink, but they wrinkle, they crinkle, and then they're not good and flat and soft anymore. So I've given a link. I've given a link for several different products and gadgets that I'm referring to while I'm doing this, and the ones that I have recommended may not say that it's washable, but I can tell you that it is, because that's the kind of pastry cloth that I use. If you don't want to buy a pastry cloth, you really don't have to, because the other thing you can use is any cotton sack kitchen towel, not terry cloth, not textured, just a plain cotton kitchen towel. Works exactly the same way that pastry cloth does. So I'm going to roll it out. I need four things to roll dough. I need a pastry cloth. I need a sock for my rolling pin, because it's also very soft cotton and it keeps the dough from sticking to the rolling pin. I need my dough, and I need some flour sprinkled on the pastry cloth. And all of this is about rolling this out, making a nice disc, and making it easy to get off of the disc into my pie pan. So the next step is rolling your dough. And even though these handles are here on a lot of rolling pins, and they're very sexy because it makes it seem like it would make it easier and better to use them, I'm going to advise you that the best way to roll out pie dough is to press in the middle. You get a more even press, you have more control, and people end up sometimes having these long oblongs. You got to roll both ways. So you roll from the middle out to try to get that circle you're looking for. So I'm rolling from the middle out. And the other thing you can do when you have good dough that is not sticking to the pie pastry cloth is that you can maneuver, you can use your rolling pin to actually maneuver and shape it. So you can use your rolling pin to make it circular. Roll it around, roll it from the middle out, and roll it around. Now sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you end up with a weird shape. And so if you end up with a weird shape and you're trying to make that circle you want, just take a piece of dough from someplace and stick it over on the other side. And sometimes you can just do it with your fingers, sometimes you need to do it with the rolling pin. All right, the rolling pin is rolling off the table. Now there are some rolling gadgets that actually have circles drawn on them so that it says 8-inch, 9-inch, 10-inch, and those are probably very handy. If you want to know how big to make your circle so that it's going to be the right size, take your pie pan, any pie pan, and just put it flat on your dough. And as long as you have about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of dough around the edge of this pie pan that you've laid down, you know you've got the right size. You don't want it to be exactly the size of your pie pan. You want it to be bigger than. So my pie dough is good, and now it's ready to pick it up and put it in the pan. Okay, what I'm going to use today is an aluminum foil recyclable pan, because the pie I'm making today actually is going to go into my freezer, and it's going to be somebody's Thanksgiving pie. This is what I use for the pies that I sell, just because it's the easiest thing to use. In terms of best kinds of pie pans to use for home baking, I think there's kind of a toss-up. A lot of people really prefer Pyrex, the clear glass Pyrex baking dishes. And one of the beauties of the Pyrex dish is that when you're not sure if it's done, you get to see through the glass, and you can see on the sides and on the bottom if it has that nice golden brown color. And it bakes them very evenly and nicely. But right up there with Pyrex is ceramic dishes. Emil Henry has lovely dishes. And the ceramic pie dishes bake them very, very nicely and make a beautiful presentation. If you're going to use a metal pie pan, they say that the dark pie pans are better than the lighter colored pie pans. It's about how they absorb the heat. I just don't think that the metal ones supposedly bake as evenly as the others. So here's another moment that everybody cries about because you've rolled out your dough and it looks good, and then you got to get this over to here. And my mom's method was to take this, I'm not going to do it, but she would take this and she would fold it in half, and then she would somehow, get her fingers underneath that half moon, and she would put it in the pie pan, and then she would lift it and she would fold it over. That is still something that is described in a lot of recipes. I found that to be my moment when I sometimes was ready to just throw my hands up, because if it's a softer dough, it's just not easy to do that. So I learned something in a women's magazine, Women's Day or Family Circle or something, where it was a tutorial on how to make pie dough, and they showed that you can use this rolling pin as a tool in a different way. So I'm putting it at the end of the dough, and I'm going to just roll that dough very gently. I'm not rolling the dough anymore. I'm simply using the rolling pin as a means of getting it from here to there. So I've rolled it, not even all the way. I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to throw it over my pie pan, and then I'm just going to unroll it. Ta-da! And it just goes in very nicely. Okay, I'm getting ready to make apple pie filling. And if you're going to buy one gadget that you learn about today, this is the gadget. If you make one apple pie in your life, for $19.99, it will be worth your time. This is an apple peeler, corer, slicer, everything. Okay, you ready for a wow moment? Please work. Well, it does it much better on my counter. There we go. There's a suction cup on the bottom, and it suctions. And my dog is eating the peels right now. You can't see her, but she looks forward to me doing this. And what we have, I'm just pulling off the top and the bottom where there might be a little green stuff left from the peel. If you don't want to dirty a knife, you can do what I do and just use your hands. And what you have is peeled and sliced and cored apples. So I have 8 cups of sliced and peeled and cored apples in here. In the bottom of the bowl, I had already put about a skimpy cup of sugar and a 1/3 of a cup of flour and a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And now I'm going to add what I think is a critical ingredient, and that is lemon juice. And I became a stickler a long time ago for using fresh lemon juice or lime juice when it's called for in a recipe. I just think it makes a big difference. You can certainly buy the real lemon stuff, and it's a time saver, but I think fresh lemon juice makes a lot of difference. So it calls for a tablespoon. I'm going to pour that in. I'm going to mix that up, and next step will be to put it in the pie and put the lid on. What I'm going to do now is put the filling into the prepared pie crust. You can, as I said, this recipe calls for 8 cups of apples. There are recipes that will tell you to use 10 or 12 cups of apples, and it's kind of a macho thing with apple pie for some reason. In fact, I don't know how many of you have been to the Blue Owl in Kimmswick, but she has a pie that I think is called, I don't know, 3 Mile Pie or Levee Pie, something. It's to commemorate the flood in '93, and her pie literally is like this high. I mean, maybe higher. It's a huge pie, but it is just this domed pie. And I personally don't think it's so pretty. I think that you don't want a giant pie. So I think 8 cups of apples is pretty good. And the reason that I like using Granny Smith apples is that they don't shrink as much as other apples. There are certain apples that have more water content, and you can be caught by surprise. You start out with a pile that looks like this. You put your top crust on, you bake it, and when it comes out, what you have is your filling, which is baked down, and you have a pocket up here of air between the top pie crust and the baked apples. But Granny Smiths really hold their shape. This is a step you don't want to skip. This was one of those hard-learned lessons. Years ago, I was a camp director at Camp Bear at the JCC here in St. Louis, And we had All America Week, the week before July the 4th, and on the Friday before July 4th, it was my idea to have every camp group make their own pie. A noble venture. And the first group came in and everything went well. We had the pie in the oven. And the next group came in and I think I had a second pie in the oven, and it took maybe till the third group before I realized that we were making the pies without the butter. I had just simply forgotten. So what you have when you don't put butter, especially in an apple pie, is sort of like baked cinnamon apples in crust. But it's not apple pie. You need that butter because that helps create that delicious juice that you want to have in a pie. Okay, at this point, technically this pie is done. If you have pressed it down evenly all around, you can leave it alone and say I'm done. But if you want to make it prettier, which you usually do, then you can do all kinds of things at this point. You can take a fork and you can use the back of the fork and use the tines to press down all the way around. You can take a teaspoon and turn the teaspoon the other way and press it so that you have the indentation of the tip of the spoon, and that makes like a petal design all the way around. What I always do is just crimp it, and there's a million ways to crimp. Some people pinch it like that. Some people push it outward. I push it inward, and that's just because probably that's how my mom taught me, or maybe that was just what was easiest for me. I don't know. There's no right or wrong way to do this. And I just floured up my hands because they've kind of gotten sticky and I don't want the crust to stick to me. And I use these fingers and push the pie dough in between my fingers and just go all the way around. And it really is not difficult. You know, it's one of those things that obviously gets easier when you've made a lot of pies, but as I said, you can do whatever you like at this point. And when I do pie parties at people's houses, when I first started doing these parties, I was very concerned that if we put 4 apple pies in the oven at the same time, I wanted to make sure everybody got their pie to take home. So I had a Sharpie and I made them write their name on the bottom of the pan. And I learned very quickly that that was completely an unnecessary step because every single pie looked different. Everybody's pie is completely unique, and everybody's going to be able to tell which their pie is because we all have our own way of doing things. So this is my way of doing things. This is a finished apple pie, which if I were going to bake it, I would put it in the oven right now at 375. I would set it probably for maybe 35 or 40 minutes. And then check on it every few minutes, and you're looking for that golden brown color on the top. Now some people before they bake will do an egg wash on top of their pie, and I have tried that, and I personally prefer not to do that because when you put an egg wash, even though it gives it that beautiful shiny bakery finish, it gives it a quick browning process. It gets that golden color, excuse me, that golden color faster than it normally would. And I use the color to guide me in terms of knowing how close I am for the pie to be done. So I prefer to just bake it naked and have it be naturally golden brown and then sprinkle some cinnamon sugar on at the end to make it pretty. So I had an apple pie in the oven and the timer just went off so that I could check it. And I am showing you that the color of this top pie crust is a beautiful golden brown, which is pretty much exactly the color that I want it to be. However, there's no bubbling coming up through the slits that are on the top of the pie. And when you make a fruit pie of any kind, the way to know that it really is done and ready to come out of the oven is when you have that fruit cooked completely and bubbling up through the slits. So I don't want to keep cooking it and burn the top or make it too dark brown. So I'm going to put it back in the oven, set it for another 7 or 8 minutes, put a piece of aluminum foil over the top, which means that the top will stop browning, but the insides will keep cooking. And I'll bring it out and show you the bubbles when we have them. So I just took the pie out. I wish you could hear this. I don't think you can hear it at home, but it absolutely is bubbling. We can hear it. There's steam coming out of the slits, and most important, there's apples bubbling up through those slits. So this is one done pie. And what I do at this point always is just my personal choice. I have a mixture of cinnamon sugar and I sprinkle it over the top to make it kind of twinkly. And that's done, and then all it has to do is cool. My best advice for anybody who wants to eat a fresh apple pie is not to try to eat it right now. If you cut into this right now, it would be hot and delicious, but what you would have is like apple cobbler. It needs 45 minutes, probably half hour to 45 minutes at least, to just cool down enough so that it begins to solidify so that you can cut it. So I'm just going to put it over on my stove, let it cool on the upper rack, on the burner, and I'm going to turn my oven off, and that's that. I think I mentioned that I always like to end with a quote about pies, and I'm going to leave you with two today. One that's just funny. This is my favorite funny quote, and I wish I could tell you who said this. I found it somewhere online. The question was, how many people can eat a pie? And the answer is 1 girl after a breakup, 4 high school boys, 8 to 10 dinner guests, or 12 ladies who lunch. That's the answer to how many can eat a pie. This pie will divide very nicely into 8 very nice sized pieces. The not so funny quote, but a nice quote is, at once impressive and unremarkable, pie can be complicated and challenging, or simple and homey. Whether ordinary or elegant, though, a pie is not something to eat by yourself. It should be made to share, preferably while fresh and warm. So I have a fresh warm pie here that I'm now going to offer the 2 people who so beautifully helped videotape this program, and they can let you know how it is when you see them next.
Okay, how delightful was that, Marcia? Thank you.
You're
welcome. Just outstanding. Like I said to you earlier, I really feel as if I could tackle a pie right now. I learned so many tips, and I love the way you very clearly explain things and anticipate what some questions might be, and incorporate that into your presentation, and you really do make it look easy. So thank you so much. I think we all understand why you are so well known for your pies and why you have been selling your pies all over the area for years. And thank you, Brooke and Lisa, for the videotaping of Marcia. So we've got questions in the chat, and we probably have some other questions. So let's dig in.
Susan,
Yeah.
before we begin with questions, can I do my disclaimer here?
Of course.
Just an explanation. I want everybody to know that, first of all, this was a beautifully edited presentation. There was a lot more footage, and Brooke, I guess, was the one who did this and did a beautiful job editing. What you didn't get to see is me periodically saying, this dough really feels sticky today, and I kept throwing in more flour. It just, I don't know what's wrong with this dough. It just, I need to, maybe the butter was too warm. I don't know. I just kept fussing and adding more flour, and you could see that I was ultimately able to work with it. But after they left that day, the light bulb went off, and I have 2 things to tell you. The most important thing I have to tell you is that when you think something isn't right, it's not right. When you think it's not right, when it doesn't feel right, then there is a mistake, and you either need to fix the mistake or you need to redo. So my sense that something was not right was correct, because the video shows me measuring out 2 cups of fat. I very clearly showed you how to measure 1 cup of shortening, and then I added a cup of butter. Well, if you look at your recipe, the recipe that I gave you says 1 cup of fat. 1 cup of shortening or butter. What I was doing, I'm ending up making over 100 pies for Thanksgiving for customers. I had already made about 10 batches of pie dough after that day that they came. And I doubled the recipe inadvertently. Whenever I make that recipe, I always double it. And the doubled recipe calls for 2 cups of fat, but it also calls for 5 cups of flour. So the reason that it felt sticky and the crumbles weren't as dry as they usually are, is that I had put in the wrong amount of fat. So I did make the pie. You saw me make the pie. I froze that pie, as I said, and I baked that pie. And this is the baked apple pie. And I actually cut off a little bite of it just to make sure that the crust tasted okay. It looks pretty. It's going to taste okay. I doctored it up and it worked. But the recipe that you have is what you should follow. Don't go back and look at the video, because it will teach you to use twice as much fat as you need. And I apologize for that.
Okay. So, and with that, one of the comments in the chat from Ellen is that Crisco also comes in a butter flavor.
Yes.
That's just for everybody to know. And Barb Kramer is also telling us that Penzies, which the Penzies I know is in Maplewood, carries Diamond's kosher
That
salt.
makes sense. I've not looked there. Yeah,
Okay, and they also, I guess, run out of it, so you have to call ahead. Now, we had Kate from Pittsburgh wants to know if you can use the technique in a food processor. And that was early on when you were doing the
water.
flour into the liquid.
You know what? That's not how you would do it with a food processor. The food processor takes care of that for you. So you've put your dry ingredients in, you've pulsed it 2 or 3 or 5 times, whatever, and you've got your crumbles in there. And then you've got that opening in the top of a food processor. You take your half a cup of water and you turn it on and you just pour your water in. And again, you can pulse it. Probably that makes the most sense. But the food processor will combine that water very easily for you.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. What do you use to cover your rolling pin? And then I want to add a question to that, a personal one. I don't own a rolling pin. Can I cover a wine bottle?
I think the answer to your question is yes, Susan. Yes. Why not? Why not? As far as what did I cover it with, it's actually called a rolling pin cover. My mother called it a rolling pin sock, but I think if you look for it online or you go to Bed Bath & Beyond, you'll see little packages. Usually they sell them 2 in a package, and they're called rolling pin covers. And it's just that soft ribbed cotton, that you put over that rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin cover, just use flour. Take your rolling pin, rub some flour on the rolling pin. It's all, either of those techniques is about just making sure that your dough doesn't stick.
Okay, very good.
I'd like video of you rolling out a pie crust with a wine bottle, by the way.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Okay, so you let us know. I would think that's like where you got when you gave us websites, the pastry cloth and rolling pin cover, and that will give us all the information we need about where to find those products.
Yes.
Okay. We had Kate again from Pittsburgh saying she likes a mixture of different types of apples. Have you ever tried that?
I have not. I sort of have just gotten into a rut of using the Granny Smith, but a lot of recipes recommend using a mixture because of if they're sweet, then there's tart, and I think you experiment, figure out what you like, but there's nothing wrong. The taste of a Jonathan apple pie is delicious, but the Jonathan apple pies have a lot of water content, and I just have learned that they shrink up so much, and I've stuck with Granny Smith's.
So that leads me to, that's a good lead into Farrellyn's question. She says her biggest problem, and she's such a good baker, I can't imagine she has any problems. But she says, my biggest problem in making apple pies is too much liquid after it's cooked. So are you saying the secret to that is the kind of apples you use?
Could be. You know, I don't know what, well, you have to have flour. You have to have some kind of thickener. And
Yeah.
so some people, I use flour, again, because that's what my mother used and that's what Betty Crocker uses. But a lot of people use tapioca. Some people use cornstarch. And so if you find that you really, that is a problem having a soupy apple pie, maybe you need to try a different kind of thickener or add a little bit more. I mean, you want to be cautious because if you add too much of any of those things, it's going to be gloppy and that's going to be not a good texture either.
Carolyn?
I use potato starch sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I don't like the floury gumminess, but I use Granny Smith apples.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it's still runny. And I don't know. It's
Even when it's
interesting that
cold, even when it's
it
cold.
gels up more when it's cold.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I cut back on sugar. So I don't know. It's it's just a thing with apple pies.
Yeah.
Maybe
I wish I had an answer.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to interrupt here just for a second. I'll go back to questions. I'm going to do our first drawing. We have 2 drawings this morning. And this drawing is for the gadget, the coring, peeling gadget. And the winner of that gadget is Marilyn Brown on the call. Marilyn? Not here. All right, I'm going to the next one.
Oh.
Sorry, Marilyn. Marcia Demba. Is Marcia here? No? All right. Carla Rosen.
Yes.
Here.
Carla's here. So
Hi,
Carla, you win that fun gadget to make the best pies you've ever made. Congratulations. And
Thanks,
we'll
I'm
talk
inspired.
after this. Good. All right, let's talk about real quickly, Marcia, about freezing. What's the best point? Do you freeze a pie before you've baked it? After you baked it? What's the best?
My preference, I've learned that you can do either. You can do either. I mean, this pie that I showed you was made the way that I prefer, and that is to make it up raw and then put it into your freezer unwrapped. Put it into the freezer and let it freeze. And then wrap it in saran and or aluminum foil. And then when you're ready to bake it, you don't have to thaw it. Just take it out and put it into your hot oven. It takes a little longer to bake when it is baking from frozen, but I would say doing it that way, it gives you I'm a stickler for freshness. So I don't like to freeze anything, but I would say it's, 90%, 95% as good as if you just made it and put it right in the oven. You can also bake it, let it cool completely, and wrap it in aluminum foil and make sure that it's airtight. And when you do that, my recommendation always is, because it's wrapped in foil, let it thaw at room temperature, or you can either at the beginning or the end of the process, warm it through a little. And I think that freshens it. If you stick it in a warm oven, it'll freshen it up a little.
Thank you. And from Reva, the question, how do you keep the edges from getting too brown? She says,
Oh, I'm so glad she asked that.
aluminum foil, but is there anything else?
I'm very glad she asked that, because when they came and taped me, I was thinking about so many other things, and the dog was in and out, and I got distracted. And there are some other helpful gadgets. The first thing that I will tell you is that if you look in cookbooks for recipes for apple pies or almost any fruit pie, you're going to see that they tell you to bake it at 400 degrees or 425 degrees. And that's what I did for a long time because that's what the directions told me to do. And I had two problems. The early problem was exactly what Reva, is that who's asking the question? What Reva
Right.
said is that the middle is golden, but your outer crust begins to brown much faster. And so what they recommend is that you can take aluminum foil. A lot of recipes will say, take a piece of aluminum foil and fold it and make a ring and, you know, put it around the edges of, well, that's a pain in the neck that the foil falls off and it's not even and it's a hassle. So somewhere along the line, I learned again that there is a tool that is designed exactly for that purpose. And it's a pie crust shield. And if you look, you will see that it exactly fits the outside of a 9-inch pie. And so you can put your pie in originally raw and let it bake without the shield for quite a while. But as you check on it, once you see that that outer crust is getting that color that you want it, that's when you put your shield on. And you just bake it with the shield for the rest of the time. However, I also have discovered that if you bake it at a lower temperature, it's sort of a non-issue. So you're sacrificing one thing supposedly for another, because I think the reason they tell you to bake it at the higher temperature is to get that bottom crust to brown and start cooking very quickly to keep your pie from being soggy.
Mhm.
And that does make a lot of sense. So the compromise here, there are pie bakers and recipes that when I am calm and I have time and I can be thoughtful, this is what I do. I set my oven for 425 and I put my pie in for about 12 or 15 minutes at 425. And then I turn it down to 375 for the rest of the time. The caveat is you've got to set a timer, because if you forget, then you get burned and your pie gets burned and it's a mess. So most often, I don't do that. I just bake it at 375 and it seems to work. When I worked I worked at Winslow's Home for about 3 years and shared a kitchen with a bunch of chefs. And I just ended up having to bake my pies at the temperature that they were roasting their turkeys. You know, I couldn't set it at 425 or whatever I wanted for my 4 pies because it was big convection ovens and we were sharing the space. And I learned that it worked. I mean, nobody has ever complained to me that my pies are soggy. And so as long as there's no complaint and no issue, then I don't see that it's a problem. And at 375, I don't ever have to cover the outside of my pie. The crust part browns equally with the top and it works. So it's really your choice. But there is this nifty little tool. And as long as I'm sharing tools, this is another nifty tool,
Mhm.
because apple pies are notorious for overflowing. Carolyn talked about the juice. The juice of apple pies burning on the bottom of your stove is just a booger to clean. And once it gets there, it creates smoke and it sets off smoke alarms. So this is I don't know what you call it, but it's a thing that is specifically made. It has this red like silicone thing that lifts it so that the pie is not sitting on the sheet, and you put your pie on that, and when the drips happen, they drip onto the pan, which is brilliant. So I would recommend that.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to everybody, we sent you the recipe. Brooke sent this out, and you've also got a list of all these gadgets. Marcia gave us the websites. So all the legwork has been done in terms of things for you. Also, I know that there are people who would like to have a class with Marcia or buy her pies. And so when we send out the thank you for being on the coffee talk this morning, we will include contact information for Marcia so that you can communicate with her. Couple of quick things. Marcia, again, we cannot thank you enough for the time you spent with us this morning. To show our appreciation, we are going to sponsor a child for our back to school store, which will be in July 2022. in your name. So thank you
Oh, thank you.
very much.
My pleasure,
Um,
truly.
The Coffee Talk teams, we will be taking winter break in December, and we'll be back with you on January 25th with Joe. And Joe is a personal trainer and therapist, so we'll be doing that kind of work in January. If you have suggestions for us on topics you'd like, people you'd like to hear, things you'd like demonstrated, please reach out. Let Lisa know, let me know, let Brooke or Justin know. Let us know what you might be interested in, and we'll go find it. So, given that, let me do our drawing for this delicious caramel apple pie. And I have Linda Sandmill.
Ooh.
Linda, I know you're on. Where are you? There you are. All right.
Here I am. Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi,
We will
Linda.
you about getting you that pie.
Thank you.
We had a quick question. Marcia, what's your favorite pie to bake? What's the second favorite pie to bake?
My favorite pie is summer peach pie.
Ooh,
I don't think there's anything that compares with a fresh summer peach pie. Second favorite,
blueberry.
and any summer fruit, blueberry or blackberry or raspberry or nectarine or any combination of any of those summer fruits. That to me is, I know Thanksgiving is sort of considered pie season, but to me, once the first peaches are in the grocery store, that's pie season, fresh summer fruits.
Is there one secret to baking cream pies?
Wow. Keep stirring. Don't scorch your filling. You gotta keep stirring.
Okay. Brooke says Marcia is fully booked for her pies for Thanksgiving. But if you'd like to order a pie or have a class another time, her email is marcia@pieintheskystl.com. And then, as we said, we will send it out in the follow-up email. Thank you all so much.
Oh,
For-
and the PS is that if any of you, I really hope, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if anybody does get brave and decides to make a pie, including you, Susan, and if you get in the thick of it and you have questions, my number is also posted, I think, or you can send me an email, whatever. I hope you'll let me be your pie coach. I would be happy to walk you through the process.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I know you're busy, either thinking about Thanksgiving or preparing for Thanksgiving. We appreciate it. And we wish you all a very happy holiday. Everybody, please stay well. We'll see you back on January 25th. And Marcia, again, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Brooke,
you.
thanks again for all your help.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.